These are the ways that we're seeking in Revelation to unlock our times, but I want to suggest a different way of thinking about this morning. A more responsible reading is to recognise that it's written to 7 churches, that it unlocks meaning for them as the first Christian readers of a letter by the Apostle John to them.
This morning's Bible reading is from Revelation 20, verse 11 to chapter 21, verse 8. Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, and prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, and those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all the liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death."
Good morning, I'm Scott. We're looking at the less read books, or is it the unread, left unread? Or perhaps with Revelation, it's kind of misread. Maybe that's a better way of thinking about it. What we often hear in the kind of popular Christian and spooky Christian areas is that they're trying to kind of decode this book and read it to unlock our times. And so is 666 on your barcode? Do only 144,000 people make it to heaven? Are you among them? Or which mass murdering world leader of the 20th century, take your pick, which one is referenced by the beast that emerges from the chaotic sea? These are the ways that we're seeking in Revelation to unlock our times, but I want to suggest a different way of thinking about this morning. A more responsible reading is to recognise that it's written to 7 churches, that it unlocks meaning for them as the first Christian readers of a letter by the Apostle John to them, encouraging and inviting and exhorting them to be faithful in spite of very adverse circumstances which have begun and will come their way. And thus us, in continuity with them, can hear those words. It's still a word for us, but first we must unlock its meaning by looking at the first century. The letter is written to 7 churches in what we would call modern-day Turkey, and that land was part of the great Roman Empire. And these churches are very small Christian communities, emerging, as we'll see, out of the Jewish communities and becoming increasingly Gentile. And they were facing various problems. If you read through the famous 7 letters, or 7 churches, the letters to the 7 churches, you'll see that there's a whole series of issues which they're facing. There are false leaders who are harming and leading them astray in Ephesus. There is the slander of the Jewish synagogue community in Philadelphia. There is the threat of prison, which is against them. The threat of death, And indeed, there's a reference in chapter 2, verse 13 to Antipas, who had suffered martyrdom, who had been killed for his faith. There was temptation. You might remember this constant warning in those letters to the 7 churches to not participate in idolatry and immorality. We must realise that the ancient Greco-Roman world was one where it was very hard to disassociate yourselves from such things. If you wanted to buy food, it would be for sale just near, or at least the meat that you wanted to buy was sacrificed at the pagan temples. There was the so-called Holy Trinity of temple life: gluttony, drunkenness, and immorality. And what this letter is written for is to encourage Christians to persevere in an hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the whole earth. In other words, there is a mood of impending crisis which is running through John's letter. For the date of this letter is towards the end of the 1st century, which coincides with a period of history for the next 200 years when the Roman state will declare war on Christianity, or will at least have a series of running battles. And that will result in great suffering, in lots of Christians falling away and denying their faith, and many being killed very publicly. I want to give you a little bit of a sample of what life might have been like in that area. In 112 AD, so just maybe 15 years after this letter was written, 20 years after it was written, the governor, called Pliny, of Bithynia, which is kind of just in the northern parts of Turkey, wrote to the Roman emperor, and we have a record of his letter. The name of the Roman emperor was Trajan, and the local governor, Pliny, was concerned that Christianity was spreading from the towns to the countryside. And what this did was that it kind of gutted the local economy. People bought less idolatrous meat from the temple. People went to the temples and the restaurants associated with the temples much less frequently. And Pliny, he was responsible for the economy, right? And he's worried about what this is doing. And so he writes to the Roman emperor, and he writes something like, look, I'm happy to execute these Christians if they're not Roman citizens. I've done that already. But what should I do with all of them? They're kind of, there's more and more. The more I kind of kill, the more arrive. And then he writes in the letter, and could you clarify what their crime is? Was it that the mere profession of their Christianity was a problem? Or were there vices associated with their faith that was the thing that we were punishing them for? And then he goes on, he says, and what should I do with the young who are claiming to be Christian and the infirmed that are claiming to be Christians? Should I kind of be more lenient with them? And the reply came from the emperor. And he said, look, you're doing a good job. I mean, this is what you should do in government. You should always encourage your governors. You're doing a good job. Don't organise a general inquisition. Don't go after them. But when news comes, when you have evidence, look, you're doing a good job, keep punishing them. Kill the non-Roman citizens, punish the others when obvious cases come to your attention. But the emperor said this to Pliny, but pardon them if they show that they're no longer Christians by offering prayers and sacrifices to the gods. So the Christians found themselves in trouble as they emerged out of the protection of Judaism and the synagogue. As they became more Gentile, they were less tolerated. Now, Rome was a fairly tolerant place, brutal but tolerant religious-wise. It liked gods, and it just added gods to the already marketplace of gods. What the Christians presented as a problem to the Romans was not another god, but an exclusive god. They would have been happy to accommodate diversity. They had a very inclusive culture. The problem was that they elevated this Jesus to be Lord over all the other so-called gods, as the Christians said. And the Romans were worried. They said, well, this risks offending the gods that we have, and it risks, therefore, famine and disease and war. In other words, this claim that Jesus is the Lord is a threat against the well-being of the state, of the whole Roman Empire. This is why it was a state crime, punishable by death. And in particular, it denied that the father of the state, his name was Caesar, who was godlike, it denied that he was the Lord. When the Christians said Jesus is Lord, you know how we read some of the Bible verses, if you declare Jesus is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. That sounds pretty easy to be a Christian. But in the ancient world, when you declared Jesus is Lord, you were making a political as well as a religious statement. You were saying that Caesar is not Lord and that all the gods are just so-called gods. And for that, 200 years of persecution followed. Let me give you another story of a 22-year-old woman called Perpetua. She was a new mother in the early 3rd century in North Africa, and her diary survives. She was a well-to-do lady, and she had a slave called Felicity, who was pregnant, and a bunch of others in her household. And they were all arrested for becoming candidates for Christian baptism. And we have a fairly open baptism policy here at this church. If you want to be baptised in the ancient world, you could be arrested. They were catechumens, that is, they were learners. And having refused to denounce their faith in Jesus and make an offering to Caesar, they were sentenced to death by wild animals in the public arena. While awaiting their sentence, Perpetua, who was a new mother, was separated from her newborn, and she had to ask that her newborn would come and feed from her breasts. Her father came and pleaded to renounce Christianity. And her slave girl, her name was Felicity, she was pregnant. And the Roman guards watched while she gave birth in the Roman prison. 4 weeks premature. The child was adopted, and Felicity died with the rest of the 4 in the arena by the wild beasts. Perpetua's diaries are read annually in some of the churches in North Africa for centuries after this happened to commemorate her martyrdom and those who were martyred with her. Now, all this was only resolved when Constantine, in the early 4th century, became a Christian. He was the Roman emperor, and he legalised Christianity and eventually made it the state religion. And so you are here today, or at least one of the reasons. This is what the book of Revelation is for. Not to decode your problems, but to encourage faithfulness in the face of terrible suffering. It's written to small groups of Christians who are disorganised, vulnerable, didn't even have a New Testament to read, probably had bits of it. And they faced a period of suffering which should have wiped the name of Jesus from the pages of history. And what the book is, it's a vision of a more ultimate reality. You know how we see just what's in front of us, and we fail to see what is all around us? Well, John's inviting us to see, to actually open the door into heaven and to see ultimate reality, to meet the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The victorious one, he's called. The slaughtered lamb, paradoxically. And despite the havoc that is being reaped throughout the earth, the souls of those who have been martyred are safe, we read in Revelation, and they're safe with Jesus, the victorious slaughtered lamb, and their cries of justice are not forgotten. The book of Revelation is therefore there to provide you comfort and assurance and motivation to keep saying, Jesus is Lord, with all that meant. For we too live in a very different, but there are analogies, society to that of Rome. We live in a very tolerant and inclusive world, just like Rome. Except when you say, Jesus is Lord. except when you make an exclusive claim about Jesus. Our culture is happy to have Jesus among the gods, among the secularism, among the idolatry, but to say Jesus is Lord and he asks things of me and I must say no and I must say yes, well, I don't know. There's an intolerance to our tolerant world, isn't there? And so Christians throughout history and across the world need this unveiling reality to fuel our perseverance. These themes come together right at the end. And you'll see it in your reading if you want to follow along. Verse 11 of Revelation 20, then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. And the earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. Such is the gravity and awe of this moment of reckoning that even the created order flees from the presence of God. And yet, where can you and I flee from God's presence? Isn't that a psalm? Where shall we flee? For you and I are created in the image of God and therefore are morally responsible beings. Every word and every thought and every deed will be held to account. As Abel's blood cried out to God from the earth, which he was murdered in by Cain, so the evil perpetuated by humanity and by you and by me cries out against us. It cannot flee from the presence of God. Death will not even hide us from accountability. There's a reason there are deathbed confessions. Death will not hide us. And for those even who have died in Revelation, it says, they are called. I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. And each were judged according to what they had done. Verse 13. And those who were judged according to their deeds are thrown, in verse 15, into the lake of fire. Now, this is a book of imagery. We ought not to speculate on the temperature of hell, nor the furniture of heaven, someone once said. But here we have a picture that those who reject God's invitation are given what they ask for: an eternal separation or exile from God. Hell is locked from the inside, C.S. Lewis once said. They asked to be judged according to their deeds. They lived accountable to themselves, and so they are judged accordingly. The book is open. The dead are brought to account, and they receive the just recompense, the reward for their deeds. And so it is with all of us, if it were not for another book. For there is another book early on. You'll see it in verse 12. If you look in your news sheet there, another book was opened, which is the book of life. And those whose names are in that book have a different destiny. This is the book that records the name of those who are not judged according to their deeds, but who have fled to the slaughtered lamb and called Jesus as their Lord. Rock of ages, cleft for me, I think of the hymn. Let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy wounded side which flowed be of sin the double cure, saved from wrath and make me pure. The good news of Jesus is that we don't need to flee as the heavens and the earth did from the presence of God, but that we flee to God's provision. Yes, we need to flee somewhere. Who can stand in the presence of God? The blood of Abel, the crimes and sins which we have done call out against us. We need to flee somewhere, but this is the message of Revelation, and indeed the gospel, that we flee to God's provision and put our trust in Jesus' death and his resurrection, the slaughtered lamb who was resurrected and victorious for us. And therefore, in relationship with him, we too are victorious. We are safe. Our destiny is somewhere else. Our name is written in another book. And so we see, verse 1 and 3 of chapter 21, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. This is an image of chaos in the ancient world. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They'll be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. This is the new world order, where Jesus is Lord, where a Tower of Babel has not been built by humanity to reach heaven, but a gift from God has come out of heaven to earth. And love and beauty and reconciliation and safety for God's people is now experienced. And look who comes with God. It's the bride. It's the church. It's those who have suffered. It's those who are victorious martyrs, safe with Jesus in heaven, who now come back to the inheritance of the earth. Think of the best experiences that you've had in this life, the taste of heaven, when you set your eyes for the first time on a newborn child, particularly if they're yours. They're even cuter. Or your grandchildren. Think about moments of celebration, of friendships. Think about the chills that you get down your spine when you see a beautiful sunset from your Creator. These are small tastes of heaven which will be permanent and amplified. This is the new world order. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Verse 4. There'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. I was with someone in palliative care last week and I read those verses. Think of all your regrets in this life. Think about all your fear that you currently hold. Your sins, the harm that has been done to you and by you. All that pain, gone. Verse 5. I am making everything new. This is true and this is trustworthy. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the spring of the water of life. And those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I'll be their God. They'll be my children. Now, I don't know who needs to hear this morning. In one sense, we all do, right? Certainly Perpetua and Felicity, at the end of the 3rd century in northern Africa, needed to hear this as they heard the cry of their newborns. And their father, at least in Perpetua's case, her father plead with her to renounce her faith. Those Christians who were being rounded up or perhaps showed some evidence of Christianity who Pliny then went and interrogated, they needed to hear it. Those who are asked to offer a sacrifice to Caesar and who need to refuse need to hear it. We need to hear it, don't we? Maybe you're facing terrible suffering. Maybe you're being tested, your faith in some way. The message of Revelation is this: do not fear. Stand firm. Resist evil. Do good. Love Jesus. For Jesus is the slaughtered lamb who is victorious. And we with him are victorious and safe. And he is making everything new.